Hello, welcome to Stories in Time. My name's Ellouise Schoettler. I'm here to tell you a story. The day I started the first grade in 1942, my father left to go to the United States Army. It was World War II. I was 6 years old. Wow. And I had no idea how much our lives were going to change. There were 3 children in our family, me and 2 sisters. I was the oldest. When Daddy left, my mother was living in a rented house larger than she needed, and she moved to an apartment because it would be easier to take care of, and there would be people around 24 hours a day, and that was what she needed. She also worked early in the morning at the local Air Force base, and she had to leave early, and she came back 6 or 7 o'clock in the evening. We were getting along pretty well. I finished the first grade. I started the second grade and finished it the next year. That's 2 years that Daddy was gone. Now, in the middle of the second grade, he was shipped out to India. He was an airplane mechanic, and they shipped a group of them to an air base in India that was on the edge, and they took care of the planes that flew the hump to go into China. That's another story. But he was taking care of those airplanes. So the second year he was there, he was in India. The third year came up. I was still in a boarding school out in Belmont, which was 15 miles away, because polio had run through Charlotte. And my mother was very frightened that Linda and I would pick that up, and it would be devastating. So the nuns let us come out there to live with the other students. Oh, it was interesting. I have to tell you, it was very interesting. And in that 2 years, we grew accustomed to having just a very small family, 3 girls and a mom. Well, 1945, the war ended. And guess what? Daddy came home. That was tough for the veterans who were coming home. It was hard for the veterans themselves to readjust, and for the families. I mean, we had been living in an apartment that seemed comfortable, seemed big enough. It had 2 bedrooms, a living room, and a kitchen and a bathroom, and it was fine for us. But when Daddy came home, it just shrunk. It was like it was shrinking because there just wasn't enough room. With now Daddy home and Linda and Kathy, and we had grown. We weren't little teeny babies anymore. We were up and walking around. I was in the 5th grade, and I was in the 6th grade and the 7th grade while we were still living there. I was bigger, and I began to resent it even more that I was sleeping in the same bedroom with my sisters when I really wanted privacy. Those were part of our conversations at supper or anywhere else we could talk about it. And will we ever have a house again? Will we? Now, there were a lot of veterans and their families who were asking those same questions. Will we ever go back to our lives as they used to be? Will we have a house for our children? I gave up. I didn't think they ever would. I thought we were going to live and die in that apartment on Hawthorne Lane in Charlotte, North Carolina. Well, it was March. March came up. It was so windy that year. And Daddy decided that what we would do for the weekend, we always tried to have something fun going on for the girls for the weekend. And he said, I'm going to make you some kites. They're going to be wonderful kites, and you'll be so glad that I did it. And that was true. We sat on the floor and watched what he was doing. He took metal coat hangers, and he bent the edges so that they had little holes on them that the strings would go through. And he covered them with the Charlotte Observer, "We'll send the news flying," he said, and laughed. And we watched all that. I don't know what kind of glue he was using to fold those down, so that they would stay on the frame, but it certainly did have a really strong odor. And I can remember that it filled the room. And one wasn't thinking about safe in those days. One was just worrying about glued. It was ready on Sunday afternoon. He made it on Saturday, and it was ready for Sunday. The weather had turned beautiful. It was sunny. There were winds that were going to fly those kites, but it was warmer and the sun was shining. "Louie, have you got these girls ready so that we can go out? We've got to find a place that's big enough to fly these kites. We don't want trees. We want to go out in the country and see if we can't find a field or a pasture." So she bundled us up and we took our lunch. Actually, we were going to go for as long as we could stay out there. He put the kites carefully in the trunk of the car so that they wouldn't bend. And he had glue and he had other things that he would need if anything terrible happened to them. So we rode for a long time down Central Avenue, which was a main street in Charlotte that headed out toward the country. Yeah, it headed out along the highway toward the country. The name of it changed. It became a number, and we kept on riding. And we didn't see any fields. There were still houses taking up most of the room, but all of a sudden, there was a large, large amount of land. And all that we saw on that land were sticks and strings. Somebody was marking off something, but it wasn't blocking flying kites. Daddy turned right onto the road that led right through all of that land. "Look, Robert, I don't think you ought to go back here. This is private. Louie, this is Sunday. Who's going to be back here but us?" "Well, if you think I don't want to get us in trouble or anything," "We're not getting in trouble." So he pulled off to the side and we got out the kites. And we walked and we stepped over those strings that were marking off places until we found, almost on a little hill, a place where he could run with the kites and get it launched. And he did that. And those gray and black and white papers looked really blurred, but they looked beautiful. And they had a string hanging on the tail, hanging off the bottom that he had made by tearing up different colored fabrics, tying them together. And it took to the air, and it was soaring ahead of us, and the tail was whipping around. And he let each one of us take turns holding the string, even though it was like it was fighting us back. It was fighting us back. We were there several hours, I know, before we even ate our sandwiches. And we were there and we were flying those kites, and it was wonderful. And then Mother and Daddy started walking around and looking. And look at this spot, Robert. If they're building houses out here, honey, this would be a wonderful place to buy a house. Don't you think the GI Bill would take care of this? We could get a GI loan. Well, I don't know, Louie. We'd have to see. We don't know how much it's going to cost and what it's going to be. And, well, there's more to find out, I heard my mama say. We talked about those kites for days. It had been so wonderful. Our dad was once again our hero. He had done something wonderful for us, not necessarily because he was in the Army or because he was working a job. He took us and we flew that kite. It was about 10 days later, something like that, and we were sitting down at the table for supper. And they were talking and we were chattering, and then he said, "I had to drive out to the country this week, and I went just like we did when we went to fly the kites. I went right back out that road until I came to the place where we had stopped and flown the kites. Well, there's a big change out there. They've got a big sign. Louis, don't worry about your house and the place where you thought you were going to build your house on that lot. That's not a suburb. That's not a place where they're building houses. Well, Robert, it's all marked off. Did you really look at what the sign said? Yes, I did. And it's going to be the Evergreen Cemetery. That's why those are marked off in small sizes. They're plots, not lots. They're plots. And they're not going to be building up houses. They're going to be digging down for graves. Oh. Well, it was a story that we told on our family to each other because we were the only ones that really cared about that or thought it was too funny. And about 15, 20 years ago, before Daddy got to the place where he really needed a plot, not a lot, he went out there and he looked around. And one evening, my telephone rang up here in Maryland, and I answered. And Mother said, Ellouise, your dad's standing right here. Robert, are you going to talk to her now? And he said, yes, give me that telephone, please. And when he had the phone, he said, Ellouise. I said, yes, sir. And he said, I bought a house this week. You'll never believe it. I bought a house this week for your mom and me to be in forever. And I said, well, what could it be? Where did you buy it? I said, honey, do you remember that place where we went to fly the kites? Well, that's a cemetery, Daddy. He said, yes, I know that. That's a cemetery. But it's Evergreen Cemetery. But that's where I bought our new place where we'll live forever. So when you come to Charlotte, once it's needed and we go out there, you come to Charlotte, you'll know exactly where to come to visit with us. And he just started laughing. And at first, I didn't know what to say. I was almost in tears. And then I realized how funny that was. They had wanted a place at Evergreen. They had chosen their place then, and they bought the same spot. And when I go to Charlotte, I do go and visit them. And I think of the day that we flew the kites. Thank you for coming. Thank you for listening to my story.